Hi everyone, I'm Kassy. Thank you so much for coming. This is also my first time at Hacks Hackers. So I'm going to be talking to you today, I should use a clicker, about reaching new and diverse audiences on Instagram. So I'm actually a newly freelance journalist slash social media strategist, and so I was just previously, very recently, at Quick Take by Bloomberg, which you may know as TikTok with a C, not a K, like the app. And so it is now known as Quick Take, and Quick Take is basically Bloomberg's kind of general news branch, which is aimed at reaching the next generation of Bloomberg's audiences, so younger people who we like to call millennials, and the future decision makers of the world. And so what's different about Quick Take from Bloomberg is that unlike Bloomberg News, which has a website, Quick Take is only on socials. So we would focus on kind of breaking news and also delivering news only on social media accounts. So we have, obviously, Twitter is our biggest, and then we also had Instagram and also Facebook, YouTube, and LinkedIn as well. And so it was a lot of kind of just delivering news directly onto social media, which I'm going to talk a lot about. And I focused a lot on Instagram, which is based on my previous experience at BuzzFeed News. So I'm going to be talking a little bit more about that. So I joined BuzzFeed News 3 years ago as a global news reporter and also producer, and so I was part of a 4-person team that was had kind of two goals. The first one is to kind of figure out ways to tell like global news stories. I'm having trouble reading. Stories in ways that kind of reach new audiences across owned and distributed platforms. So we wanted to kind of take world stories and make them go viral the same way that because American news tends to dominate the news cycle a lot, but there are really important and cool stories going on around the world, so we wanted to figure out ways to kind of make them also, part of the news cycle. And then the other part was kind of how we worked. So our whole job was to kind of stay 6 months ahead of everybody else in the newsroom, and we just basically would try and experiment with a bunch of random stuff. So I basically was hired, and they were like, we want to figure out how to use video to like tell news stories. Why don't you guys just like go and shoot a bunch of stuff and then tell us what works and what doesn't work? And then once we figured that out, then we would share our learnings with the newsroom, and then that could then be implemented across the newsroom. So I'm just going to show you guys an example of a video that we made, which was just like this model of experimentation that I'm talking about. I guess I should tell you about this video a bit. So basically, we were kind of in the newsroom one day, and we saw that Supreme, the brand, had started. Basically, they were selling a brick for 30 pounds, and so people on Twitter were totally freaking out about it. And we were like, how can we make a video about this? And so we thought about different ways, and then we realized, our office was back in the day at Oxford Circus, and so right down the street was a Supreme store. So we're like, why don't we just go down there and speak to some people who are gonna like buy this brick? And so we go down to Soho, and then there's obviously a queue, but we start speaking to some people, but it's also the launch of their new season, and so everybody knows about the brick, but nobody's buying it. And so we're like, what are we gonna do? We really should do something. We're here already. So I was just kind of like, why don't we just go and buy a brick? And so this is what happened.
This is the Supreme brick. It's bubble wrapped? Like what? To spend this much money on a singular brick is going to be really, really interesting for me. I'm breaking the seal on my Supreme brick. And here we go. So, yeah, it's a brick. It says Supreme, and I paid 30 pounds for it. Okay, I'll be very honest. This is a pretty nice brick. Like, it's pretty cool. It's smooth. I'm like slowly getting it. Like it's like the idea that no, this is stupid. It's a brick. Like it's a nice brick. It's a good brick.
Anyway, they didn't let us film in the store, so we couldn't actually go inside. But this was actually one of our first viral hits, and it did millions of views on Facebook and also on YouTube. And then later on, we were able to kind of replicate this with kind of other kinds of viral events, and we would just like go and try the thing, kind of like Bring Me, like Bring Me, but for news. And so the other thing that we would do was also do a lot of on-the-ground reporting about global news events, especially like kind of big breaking news events going on around the world, whether it was like the Olympics or, we went to, for example, Barcelona when Catalonia was declaring independence. And so we would focus, whenever we went to do reporting around the world, we basically would focus on making a wide variety of content that was all across like all platforms. So we would write articles, for example, the one that I wrote about at the Olympics in South Korea, and then, mini documentaries for YouTube and Facebook, or also like live streams where we would, be at a protest, or we were answering questions from viewers they had about a certain news event. And all of this was because we wanted to be able to kind of reach as many people as possible across different platforms. And so we were creating content that could potentially be used across, different platforms, but we would be adapting them for the specific platforms. And so some of these are, for example, some of it was very much just like social-only content. So, for example, when I was in Brazil to cover the Brazilian presidential elections, it was just kind of like live tweeting from the ground. And then we would also shoot videos that were original footage that we would make, entire mini documentaries with, or short social news videos for, say, Instagram, or just like Instagram stories. So these are all just examples of social native reporting, which is, breaking and covering news directly on social platforms. And here are just some of the examples. The recording takes a little bit, so we don't have to look at it all. But for example, I'm going to talk more about the BuzzFeed World Instagram. But as you can see, you've got the headline, and then you've got the images. So the entire story doesn't exist on a website. It's actually made for Instagram. So you look at the images, and you scroll through them, and then you later on will scroll down, and then you'll be able to see the caption, which then kind of provides you with the context and the information and the news story. And you don't have to leave the app in order to get this news, as you can see here. So another example of what I did on Quick Take is on the other slide, which is tweet threads, using Twitter threads to tell stories the same way that you would on for like an article, and then being able to use different sort of media for each tweet to kind of complement your story. And so I want to talk next about the BuzzFeed at World Instagram, which is what I spent the second half, I guess the last year and a half of my time at BuzzFeed doing. So I like to think of the BuzzFeed at World Instagram as Humans of the World meets Teen Vogue, which means that it had a twofold mission. The first one is to inform young people, and in particular young women, about important issues that are going on around the world. And then also the other one is to kind of reflect the diverse and young audience that the account had, and to highlight kind of underreported communities and minorities around the world, because, as I spoke about earlier, the American news tends to dominate the cycle, but there are so many, amazing stories out there that need to be told around the world. And so I'm just going to give a quick overview of the stats. So by the time that I left in August last year, the account was at 793,000 followers, and it was doing great conversion rates and also engagement rates. But I think the biggest and the most important part is that, as you can see from the demographics, the account had a very heavily woman audience of 74%, and also it had an extremely high percentage of followers who are under the age of 18 for a news account on the Instagram. I believe it's one of the highest for a news account on the Instagram. And so essentially the audience was very young and heavily female. And so the account was at 50,000 followers when I took it over as a dormant account, and it really, really quickly grew to 425,000 in a year, and it was the fastest growing news account in 2018. So how did I accomplish this? So through an Instagram first storytelling approach. So I am multiple things: a news reporter, I am an editor, a producer, a director, a host, and also a social media editor. But everything on the account I created for the account and also for Instagram. And so that was the approach that I took to creating content on the account. The other thing that I did for the account was that everything was created for the audience and with the mission in mind, so the audience of young women and young people. And so instead of, we didn't like shy away from any serious topics because they were hard or complicated, but we actually leant really hard into kind of politics and also like women's rights issues, social justice, activism, and those sorts of things, because those are topics that are really important to our audience and necessary that they know about. So here are just some of the examples that you can see on there. So yeah, here are some more examples of the types of stories that I would post on the World account. So you've got some serious world stories and breaking news stories, but you've also got like cute stories of Japanese granddad being a model, protests in Scotland, and kind of like lifestyle porn things going on there. But what you'll notice is that basically a lot of the stories on the World account are human stories, because people relate to people, and seeing a person is a really good way. It's like a much easier way to into a very complex social issue or political issue. And you'll also notice that I tried really hard to at least try and curate as big of a, as diverse of an experience around the world as possible, just to show, make sure that we were also reporting on underreported areas and underreported communities and minorities. Yeah, and then so one of the formats that I developed in order to, tell these stories of these complicated political or serious stories for young people was these explainers, which is I don't really know how to say this, but magnifying glass on, because I don't know how to say emoji. But basically what I would do is I would work with BuzzFeed News reporters around the world to break down kind of complex issues that require a little bit more context and understanding before, you instead of just, you read a headline and you see a photo and you totally understand. But, there's a greater context and greater level that is required in order to fully understand the story. And so here are just some examples. I'm actually going to play you 2 of them. Here.
In September, India's Supreme Court ruled that women of all ages should be allowed to enter Sabrimala Temple in Kerala, India. This comes after a petition argued that banning women of menstruating age from entering the temple violates gender equality. The temple is a focal point of one of the largest pilgrimages in the world and is dedicated to the celebrate Hindu deity Ayyappa. The temple had previously banned women out of respect for Ayyappa, so the Supreme Court ruling upset some right-wing and traditionalist Hindu groups. On Wednesday morning, 2 women escorted by police entered Sabrimala Temple in a surprise pre-dawn operation. It was then closed by priests for purification. The women's entry to the temple was met with huge protests. The state of Kerala has been shut down due to violence and calls from protesters to stand up against the lifting of the ban. But there's been overwhelming support for lifting the ban from women. Kerala's left-wing government supports the women's right to enter the temple, but the country's Hindu nationalist government says that it's an attack on religious values.
Osaka was born in Japan to a Japanese mother and a Haitian father, and they moved to the US when she was 3. In Japan, biracial people like her are called hafu, which means half Japanese, and this word can sometimes mean that they don't fully belong to the Japanese nationality. Some people have said that Osaka is not Japanese because she doesn't have the stereotypical Japanese appearance, but others have said that looks don't define identity, and criticized Japan's long-time obsession with homogeneity. In 2015, Ariana Miyamoto, the first biracial woman to become Miss Universe Japan, was criticized for not being truly Japanese. People also had mixed feelings about how the Japanese media praised Osaka's victory as their own. They pointed out that they only praised hafu in these kinds of occasions, while many are treated as outsiders in everyday life. Osaka has said she doesn't identify as American, but also doesn't see Japan as her home. She has said that her multinationality is her strength because it allows more people to connect with her.
So one of the things that we were really trying to do with these videos was to make sure that we weren't talking down to our audience, because young people are really smart and they're going out there and they're instituting change all around the world. And so we wanted to make sure that we were striking a tone that wasn't kind of like teaching them, but we were more like informing them. And so it was really important for us to put reporters on camera and have them talk in a way that kind of feels very personal and relatable. And so it almost feels like if you're watching it on your phone, as if a friend is kind of telling you a story about the news or something like that. And so in line with that, I was thinking about, stories and for Instagram stories, which, as we know, are intended for the audience that you've already built, because, as you know, you cannot access stories anywhere else on the app unless you follow an account. And then for feed posts, obviously, you can see because it goes elsewhere. Oh no, is it playing? Sorry. And then it goes to Explore, and then people come and they can see your feed, and people can DM it. But stories are more specifically made for our audience. So I was thinking about ways that, to kind of summarize the week's news for young people, especially young women, and then thinking about, but wanting to do it in a way that was true to the mission and also true to our audience, and thinking about ways that could do that wasn't just like, oh, here are 5 stories you should know about this week or read about this week. And so basically I developed this series called Woman Crush Wednesday, Badass Women You Should Know About Each Week, and it ran every Wednesday on the BuzzFeed at World Instagram, and it was hosted and produced by me. And basically what I would do is I would take women who were in the headlines around the world each week, and then I would talk about them just in a very quick, 15-second sort of thing, just so it could, we could give our audiences, information to let them know about, women's rights issues around the world, but also provide them with, role models, and, so that they can then, look up to them and be able to have this information that to go out in the world and also be able to, bring about change. And so here's just an example of what that looks like.
Indian sprinter Duty Chand came out and became the first openly LGBT professional athlete in her country. Her announcement comes less than a year after India struck down a 157-year-old law that criminalized gay sex. She said she was in a same-sex relationship with women and that everyone should have the freedom to love.
Yeah, so that's so every week I would highlight 3 women from around the world, and then this was one of the ongoing series on the BuzzFeed World Instagram. And then the other thing that we also did was also to make sure that we also listened to our audience and directly engage with them. So around Ramadan, I was thinking about how I could cover this event on the World account and kind of for our audience. And so I worked with a BuzzFeed News reporter called Ikran, and we decided that we wanted to take questions from our audience and use Instagram's Q&A feature to, see how we could also help answer any questions that they have. So we basically asked them for questions that they wanted to know about Ramadan, but didn't really have anyone to ask. And then we got thousands of responses, actually, which was really surprising, of people who were just like genuinely really interested and curious to understand more about Ramadan and, all its customs and traditions. And so we then took some of the questions that we got, and then we were able to script out responses to them and then answered them as like a series maybe 2 days later. And this was one of our highest performing series on the account. So I'm just going to show you a quick example of 2 slides.
What are some things you've always wanted to know about Ramadan but have had no one to ask? You can ask me things like why people fast, fasting times, customs and practices, or anything you wanted to know. Just leave a question down below and I'll get back to you. Ramadan is the 9th month in the Islamic calendar, and it's an important month for Muslims as we believe that the Quran, our holy book, was revealed in Ramadan.
Yeah, so we answered those sorts of questions, as well as when people break their fast, why, and so on and so forth. And so one of the questions that I always get after, I give this presentation is, if a lot of people are always like, oh, if I have a really heartbreaking story, should I not post it on Instagram? Should I post it on Instagram? And so I think there is a preconception that Instagram is supposed to be a really positive place, and you can only post positive content. So if you have heartbreaking content, you shouldn't share it on Instagram. For example, if you look at these 2 stories, you're probably not gonna, if you see this on your feed, you're probably not gonna like it. But for the World account, at least, for what I was doing, it was really important. These are stories that are still really important to our audience, and they needed to know about them. And so in the end, it was just kind of understanding that, we needed to move away from this model of just looking at likes on Instagram, because, when you yourself see a post like this, you're probably not going to like it, but you'll probably want to do something. So you might comment, or you might share it with your friend, or you might share it to your story, or, you could send it to somebody as a link or something on WhatsApp or something like that. And so instead of just focusing on likes as the primary metric, it was, there are a lot of other metrics that you can consider, especially when you're breaking, hard news or putting something that's not likely to gain a like. So you can look at comments like quality of comments. Maybe people are, commenting and saying, how can we help? People might share with other people, and you can look at impressions and how many accounts it reached, if it reached new accounts, if you gain followers from it, and so on. And actually, from my experience running the World account, these were the stories that were the most valuable for us. They were the ones that, our audience repeatedly told us that through like all of these metrics that they really, really wanted. And so it just goes to show that, young people do want news. It's just not being kind of delivered to them in ways that appeal to them or in the places that they are on. And so I also wanted to say that social media is so important just because, social media can inform reporting, and basically you can use it as kind of like a testing ground to kind of gauge audience interest and response. So for example, one of the things, I don't know if you guys have seen this this meme, the 4 Generations meme, which went viral at the beginning of like a year ago, I guess. And so I just saw this meme on TikTok, or the Chinese version of TikTok, and I thought it was really cute, and I was just like, I'm just gonna share it on Twitter because it's cute. And so I shared it on Twitter, and then it started going viral, and I was like, oh, okay, maybe this can be a post. And then so in the end, I was able to flip it into an article on the BuzzFeed News website. So basically, you can use social media, you can think of it as a testing ground of just like where you can actually get direct kind of, response from your audience, and you can see the things that they're interested in. And you can't have site traffic without having relevance on social media, and having your things be on social media really leads to site traffic, and so on and so forth. And so it's all about just building loyalty for your long-term goals. It's about taking advantage of native storytelling on distributed platforms and then using it to serve your longer-term goals. So for example, as you can see in these 2 screenshots, the first one is actually supposed to be driving subscribers to the Quick Take newsletter. As you can see in the caption, it says subscribe to our newsletter for more. And then the second one was actually for driving traffic to the website, to the BuzzFeed News website through the link in the bio. And basically you can, if you are able to build a loyal and engaged audience, they will essentially follow you anywhere. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That was fascinating. We have some time for questions. Liz? Yes, cool. I'm going to start off, use my introducer's prerogative to start off with one myself. Can you tell us about some examples of storytelling techniques that are actually quite unique to specific platforms, like this really works on Instagram but not on, say, TikTok, and an example of something that is just like actually really good practice no matter which platform you're working on?
I guess it really depends on, like, for example, Instagram, I can say that like faces and personality just do really well. As I spoke earlier, people relate to people, and Instagram being a really visual platform, obviously things have to be visual if they're going to be on Instagram. And I guess on Twitter, obviously it's a bit different. It's more about the text. And so you just really have to think about the strengths of each platform and then kind of adapt them for each.
Cool, thanks. And you had a hand.
Hi. How did you decide which stories you will run on the website? Because you run some, as you mentioned.
Sorry, do you mean from the Instagram? Or?
Yeah, from the Instagram.
So a lot of the times it was just kind of like, because I was reaching out to people for, maybe somebody in Japan posted something that was going viral. I would just reach out to them because as a reporter, I just wanted to interview them and like get a few quotes from them. And a lot of the times I'd just be like, oh, actually, I have this quote. And so it's actually really great. It also could work as an article on the website. Or sometimes, something is going super, like maybe I just started it on Instagram and then it's going super viral. I'm like, oh, actually, audiences are interested in this. Maybe we should put it on Facebook. Maybe we should put it on Twitter. Maybe we should like throw it, like put it on the website and see what happens.
Thank you very much for your talk. It was super insightful. I'm here. Sorry.
Oh, sorry, I can't see the light.
I was just wondering, one of the challenges I've faced when implementing news on Instagram and TikTok and all these new platforms is the difficulty of not being able to link back to, as easily on, say, Twitter, you can include a link, obviously, in the text. Some institutions have got around this by doing like a link tree, and then you can sort of go through that, but it's very clunky, and especially on TikTok, there's no call to action. So how important do you think that is? And it was interesting hearing you think that's not even necessary.
I think that like it depends on what your goals are. So for example, if you do want to drive traffic to your website, I think that actually the link tree thing is the link in bio or link tree thing is really, really effective, because I guess people's habits are changing, and young people are not actively going to like look up a news website and be like, I'm going to go on NewYorkTimes.com and like find this article. They would rather just be on Instagram. And when they see this post, like even for me as a user, I'm now like looking at a post I see on Instagram and they're like link in bio. I will be happy to go to their website, their profile, and click on the link tree and find that post and click it. If it means that I don't have to leave my app and like open another browser in order to like look it up.
Hi, Kassy. I'm Thomas Mason. I work in the digital video team at the BBC. It's interesting what you say about having a face to tell a story. I think still in the BBC, the conventional wisdom is that usually, we've built these rather nice branded slides, narrative slides that can tell the story, and we want contributors and people who are actually involved in the story rather than a reporter or a presenter particularly, with the exception of an established engaging correspondent, someone like Johnny Diamond, who's our royal correspondent, or Chris Mason, a political correspondent. So how often do you think that's a useful device to have, as you say, like a friend of the viewer, somebody walking you through, versus just the powerful images that you can bring from an agency or somewhere close to the story and just a bit of a narrative thread to walk you through it?
I think it really depends on the story, because sometimes maybe you're just really short on visuals and there's no other way around it, especially when you're working on a platform like Instagram that doesn't really allow for a lot of text. But you also have to kind of be, when you're doing these things, being really sensitive to kind of like who you are putting on camera and whether they're kind of engaging speakers first and foremost, but also knowing that like they should accurately kind of, you don't want to put, say, like a white man talking about an abortion issue or something like that, for example. So it's really important that, you find someone who is correct to like tell the story, I guess. And also, I guess it really depends on the story and how you decide you want to tell the story.
How often do you use that device?
How often? I don't actually know. It really depends on the story. I guess for the World account, it would just be for, whenever there was a complex story that required a bit more understanding.
Hi, Kassy. I'm Camilla. I also work at the BBC, actually, but I work in world news in the visual journalism hub. So what I was wondering is, again, about metrics. You talked about, obviously, different ways of measuring success, paying attention to DMs, to comments, which is something that I'm sure most of us struggle with, trying to prove to our editors that are important measurements as well, more than just likes and, the numbers. But how do you present them in a qualitative way? I mean, because you can have good comments, bad comments. Is it the amount of good comments that you have? Is it what people are saying? How, did you find a good way to present those, not as easily measurable
I know what you're asking.
metrics?
I guess, I'm sorry, I keep saying this, but it really depends on the story.
Yeah.
But essentially, you really have to present it in terms of like, say, for example, you do a story about like, I don't know, Morocco or something, like a small place that like maybe people around the world don't necessarily know about. But then it doesn't say you don't get as many likes as like a post you do about, Paris or something like that. And so it's being able to kind of judge the story based on not just, I guess, like location and like how well known it is, and also whether it's like such a local issue or something that could resonate globally, and then being able to voice that and say like, look, I did a story about Morocco that like nobody like knew about this place, and then it was like a super local story about, I don't know, something that nobody knew about, but then it actually did really well for a story about Morocco. If you could, like, obviously it's not going to do the same as Paris, and so I think it's just being able to present it that way. And then, I mean, data is really important. So being able to kind of keep track of all the data, and then you'll start to see patterns, and then you'll be able to say, look, like last time I did a story about Morocco, it did, this amount of likes or quality of comments. And then, the next time I did another similar story, maybe it's not about Morocco, but it's like a similar issue somewhere else. How did that do? And then you're able to then kind of see these patterns and present those as like a metric, I guess.
Hi there. Interesting talk. I was wondering, you mentioned doing breaking news on social. Did you experiment at all with actually breaking news on social before doing it on the website, or using that for scoops at all? And how did sort of the main BuzzFeed website interact or deal with that, or the editors there, if that was something you were trying to do?
So a lot of the times, sometimes a lot of the content that went on, I think it was treating each platform with like each platform's like strengths in mind. So sometimes if it's like, say, for example, a story that just like makes sense and you want to break it on the website first, just break it on the website first, treating them separately and not just being like, oh, is it important that we do it at the same time or anything like that. And so, sometimes, for example, maybe you just don't have photos to put it on Instagram, so you just have to wait. And so you just wait and then you put it on Instagram. Or, sometimes what you might not even post it on the website because maybe the main BuzzFeed news editors on the website don't deem that it is worthy to be on the website because, the bar may be different because, it's different for different platforms. And obviously for scoops, we worked a lot with like our world reporters, and so we would then kind of be able to have their scoops be published on the website, but then also exist on social so that we could direct people back and look at the wonderful work that they had done.
We've got time for 2 more questions.
Yeah.
Super quick.
Hi, Kassy. I'm Daniel. I don't work for the BBC. How do you see the changes in terms of communicating news on video-first platforms or platforms like Instagram and TikTok changing moving forwards as opposed to where it currently is?
I think that the ways that like people have been kind of doing news on Instagram have definitely, I guess everyone has kind of tried a bit of everything, and we're kind of reaching this point where things are starting to look quite similar. So I'm personally just really excited to see like what people are going to do more of. But I think that it's probably, at least on Instagram, I feel like it's going to be, I guess we can see things being like a bit less, polished, because, for example, TikToks are just like crazy, and so it could probably be something that's probably a bit more like TikTok, where it's like feels a bit more homemade, feels a bit more authentic, instead of like here's a really finely polished, beautiful piece of video that I shot for IGTV and so on. But also IGTV is really exciting. It's a really exciting place because now that they've allowed for horizontal videos, it means that there's definitely the space for like longer form storytelling on Instagram. But I haven't seen a lot of people really like take advantage of like the vertical format or do anything really crazy with it yet. So I would love to find out what people are going to do.
Last one.
Oh, hi, thanks for the really interesting talk. I was just going to ask, obviously, producing all this content for social media takes a lot of time and resource. And is there any way to independently monetize that? Or is it only a case of by driving more people to your website, then obviously you're going to reap the rewards? Because otherwise, it might feel like for a small business, for example, they might not be able to dedicate that amount of resource just to making social media content.
I think I addressed this a little earlier, but basically it is a little hard to, monetize on Instagram, for example, unless you do like paid partnerships. But I know that monetization is coming to IGTV, as Instagram have told me, and obviously there are ways to monetize on YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter, and so on. But like I said earlier, you can't have like wonderful work and just have it exist on a website because people aren't going to find it. So you do unfortunately need to dedicate resource into building this audience, and they will, be able to go to your website and read your work, and hopefully there will be new ways of monetization that are invented soon.
Cool. Thank you very much. Thank you, Kassy, for your talk and for all your answers. Big round of applause.